Russia has never truly experienced democracy. Although serfdom was abolished in 1861, which is pretty late, to say the least, Imperial Russia, with its lack of respect for fundamental human values, continued to exist into the early 20th century when it was transformed into what became known as the Soviet Union, basically a huge concentration camp consisting of numerous occupied countries. Needless to say, in such a totalitarian state, there was no place for freedom of speech, no respect for the individual or freedom of artistic expression. Human life, in and of itself, had little value except insofar as it served the interests of the rulers. This is why the number of people exterminated by their own government exceeds any possible understanding. Under such conditions, the psyche and culture of the Russian people transformed into what we can observe today when speaking with the average Russian. In my experience, the majority of Russians are not only incapable of understanding Western values, but they even hold them in contempt. One could argue that concepts like the individual or freedom of speech are very easy to grasp, and of course, on a superficial level, Russians understand them. What I'm trying to say, however, is that most Russians don't feel like they fundamentally share such values. Russians don't consider such ideas as something inherently important. They can understand them only in isolation, but not as something integral to society. And the reason lies in a culture fundamentally servile and dismissive of individual values. In Russia, the state is about everything, and the Tsar is the epitome of the state, and the people are nothing but a derivative. The people, as individuals in separation from the state, are seen as completely worthless, and this explains why, when there is a need for sacrifice, people simply accept their fate and do whatever is expected of them. Knowing one's rights, let alone defending them, standing up to a bully in the face of the government, is not a national trademark. In fact, to many Russians, such behavior simply feels wrong. This is also why many Russians like to refer to their country as the motherland. They relate to it much as one relates to one's mother, someone to be obeyed regardless of circumstances. Opposing her wishes feels deeply wrong on an emotional level. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia, being absolutely clueless as to what to do next and attempting to build relationships with Western countries, appeared to set foot on the path to democracy and declared itself one. Fundamental problem, however, was that much of the population was unable to adapt to the new reality. It didn't take long for countless fraudsters to emerge. Large numbers of Russians, lacking financial literacy, became their victims. Unfortunately, many Russians were completely unprepared for life under capitalism, which seemed alien to their culture. At the same time, the relatively small number of successful entrepreneurs who suddenly began earning substantial wealth were viewed with suspicion by ordinary citizens. Many regarded them as little more than crooks exploiting honest, hard-working people. In other words, private enterprise itself was often viewed as inherently fraudulent. Naturally, many ordinary Russians dreamed of becoming wealthy themselves, but since many lacked the skills or the ability to adapt to the new economic system, it became common to portray all entrepreneurs in the worst possible light. Culturally, I see this as a direct consequence of the Soviet past. Although these attitudes have changed to some extent, it is still common among many old Russians to scorn entrepreneurs. More generally, in the poorer regions of Russia, where the overwhelming majority of people live modestly or in poverty, the instinctive reaction toward a wealthy individual is often one of mistrust, if not outright disdain. In my opinion, one of the greatest mistakes made by post-Soviet Russia, one that helped shape the events of today, was the complete absence of a serious reckoning with its past. There was no comprehensive reassessment of Soviet history, no official acknowledgement of its crimes, and no genuine attempt to identify and learn from its mistakes. As a result, many Russians who felt humiliated or disoriented during the 1990s gradually developed a sense of nostalgia for the Soviet Union, and increasingly passionate sentiments in its favor began to emerge. When Putin came to power in 1999, he understood his people exceptionally well. He recognized the widespread longing for a great Russia and centered his propagandistic machine around it. That's precisely what he's been selling ever since. The dream of Russia's restored greatness. To many of his supporters, he has become the embodiment of the motherland itself. No matter how much their standard of living declines or how poor they become, they continue to see themselves as derivatives of their ruler. The possibility that their leader might simply be a manipulative authoritarian never enters their thinking. State propaganda has relentlessly reinforced this narrative, and propaganda is undoubtedly a powerful instrument. Yet for it to take root, something else was necessary: fertile ground. That ground consisted of the unresolved legacy of the Soviet Union, the enduring traditions of Russian imperialism, and the political culture that, in my view, predisposes many people to accept whatever fate befalls them, while placing the blame on everyone except their ruler and themselves.